Hi, I'm Nigel Kent from Trouble in Paradise, and today we are going to talk about the New York Times, my least favorite subject. And we're going to talk about an article that they published a couple of days ago regarding QAnon and how they think it's hijacking the Save the Children movement. The headline says QAnon followers are hijacking the hashtag Save the Children movement. Fans of the pro Trump conspiracy theory are clogging anti trafficking hotlines. Now, just 4 days ago, the New York Times published an article called A Playbook for Combating QAnon without presenting any valid evidence as to why they think QAnon is something that needs to be combated. I shit you not. And to add insult to injury here, is it more fair to say that QAnons are actually pro Trump or pro freedom? But I digress. Kevin Roose wrote, I saw the Save the Children hashtag trending on Twitter. It was being posted by followers of QAnon. These guys were also disturbed about human trafficking, but with a dark twist. Many of them believed that President Trump was on the verge of exposing, quote, Pizzagate, their term for a global conspiracy involving a ring of Satan-worshipping, child-molesting criminals led by prominent Democrats. It has since spawned one of the most disturbing and consequential conspiracy theory communities in modern history. Consequential, yes, but I would like Kevin to offer his opinion as to why he thinks this theory is disturbing to him. Is it the trafficking cabal Q is talking about that disturbs him, or could that be that Q is releasing stuff that threatens his employer's credibility as a publisher? What I mean is, if the QAnon intel is true, and a lot of it has been proven to be true, doesn't that mean the New York Times has been ignoring real crimes on purpose all this time? Its followers have committed serious crimes, Kevin Roose writes, and its online vigilantes have made a sport of harassing and doxing perceived enemies. The FBI has cited QAnon as a potential domestic terror threat. Now, not only is Kevin Roose, a journalist, advocating for censorship here, but he's also trying to imply some kind of link between doxing and actual terrorism. Yes, doxing is unlawful in most countries, but terrorism? Really? Terrorism used to mean trying to hurt or destroy somebody's body or property, and now it just means hurting their feelings? And speaking of these serious crimes, the Times could only dig up 3 of them in the linked article that Mr. Roose linked to. And of those 3, only one of them was a violent crime, which happened to be the murder of a mob boss who was himself a criminal. So the insinuation that QAnons are committing serious crimes is a stretch. Using the New York Times' own numbers, it would seem that the violent crime rate among QAnons is considerably lower than that of the general population, doesn't it? Then Kevin writes, like any movement, QAnon needs to win over new members, and its most recent growth strategy involves piggybacking on the anti-human trafficking movement. The idea, in a nutshell, is to create a groundswell of concern by flooding social media with posts about human trafficking, joining parenting Facebook groups, and glomming onto the hashtag campaigns like Save the Children, which began as a legitimate fundraising campaign for the Save the Children charity. Okay, it's still legitimate, dude. Nothing about the charity lost its legitimacy. The charity doesn't own the hashtag as a trademark. And furthermore, why, according to Mr. Roose, can't it simply be the case that QAnons are just actually concerned about the evil of human trafficking? If the New York Times is citing the death of a criminal mob boss in order to argue against a group who wants to end human trafficking, what the fuck side are they on? Then Kevin writes, then followers can shift the conversation to baseless theories about who they believe is doing the trafficking. A cabal of nefarious elites that includes Tom Hanks, Oprah Winfrey, and Pope Francis. But part of the strategy's perverse brilliance is that child sex trafficking is a real horrible thing, and some politically connected people, including the financier Jeffrey Epstein, have been credibly accused of exploiting underage girls and boys. And speaking out against child exploitation, no matter your politics, is far from an objectionable stance. Well, we do agree on that, Kevin. Quote, "It's probably one of the key things that's attractive about QAnon," said Marc-Andre Argentino, a doctoral student at Concordia University who studies QAnon's social media presence. I'm glad they got a college student to chime in. Quote, "Everyone agrees that child trafficking is very bad, and the argument QAnon makes is, if you're against us talking about this, you're in favor of child trafficking." Okay, I don't think no QAnon that I've ever talked to has ever made that argument. They're making two mistakes here that prove to me they don't understand QAnon. For starters, they're acting like QAnon has some official charter or platform or some specific list of talking points that act as an acid test. QAnon has no such thing. There's no membership card. There's no dues. Many QAnons don't even subscribe to the prevailing theories held by many other QAnons, and that's okay to all of them. Clearly, that's what these guys don't get, because the New York Times is not exactly tolerant of opposing opinions. The other mistake they're making is in supporting the actual point that although so many QAnons have come out to work against child trafficking, and they still manage to give them zero credit, these left-wing intellectual bozos just don't want to give anything with a Q in it credit for doing anything good. Quite the contrary. After they spent months and months last year and in 2018 denying that QAnons actually existed. And I just love how I love how they characterize lovable, fuzzy celebrities like Tom Hanks and Oprah Winfrey as completely beyond reproach, despite these celebs having real-life sexual abuse accusers who are silenced and dismissed as loonies because they happen to be QAnons. And those put-downs always come in the form of a nice Ivy League put-down phrase like perverse brilliance, which they used in this article. Aren't these the same assholes that made bullying the centerpiece of the news cycle 8 years ago? Perhaps Mr. Roose has forgotten about that. He goes on to say, weeks ago, influencers on TikTok and Instagram began speculating about baseless allegations that Wayfair, an online furniture site, was trafficking children under the guise of selling expensive cabinets and other furniture. But hold on here. Is this really baseless? Kevin Roose, do you think this is really baseless? How many dozens of examples of missing boys and girls, many with rare or unique names, did Wayfair have to name expensive furniture with on their site before the guys at the New York Times are going to stop calling this Wayfair theory baseless? We weren't just talking about first names in many cases, but both first and last names of real missing people. How in the world does the New York Times consider that merely a coincidence? These, quote, pieces of furniture had no reviews written on them, no ratings, and many of them were listed as having a quantity of just one available. Mr. Roose wants you to believe that that was a coincidence, too. He goes on to write, these allegations merged in the popular imagination, whatever that is, and soon unsuspecting people were sharing wild conspiracy theories that came straight from QAnon orthodoxy. Oh, gosh. QAnon orthodoxy? Are you fucking kidding me? QAnon is a leaderless movement that encourages all of its anons to do their own research independently and come to their own conclusions. Yet Kevin Roose calls this an orthodoxy. Okay. Kevin goes on to say, quote, with Wayfair, both accounts on the left and right were amplifying the content, Mr. Argentino, one of his experts, said. A lot of the yoga moms and juice cleanse type circles were sharing it. The strategy of seeding QAnon talking points with different audiences appears to be working. Dude, QAnons aren't trying to grow their movement just to grow their movement, okay? Most of them, as far as I can tell, actually want to defeat human trafficking and destroy the core of it. So if more people are talking about trafficking and plausible avenues of investigation for it, then it doesn't matter if they're yoga moms, Mr. Moms, or juicer type people. Okay? That's a good thing if they're talking about it. That means awareness has been raised, and that's what QAnons have been trying to do. And I can tell you that QAnons wish the QAnon movement, didn't even have to exist, because they believe that if QAnon didn't exist and never came to be known of, it probably would mean that we would not have a lot of the problems that have necessitated the QAnon movement. That's what a QAnon would tell you. Kevin Roose then goes on to say, in recent weeks, Facebook engagement on human trafficking related content has surged, according to analysis of data from CrowdTangle, Facebook-owned data platform. Interactions on posts with the Save the Children hashtag have grown more than 500% since early July. Good. Prominent mommy bloggers and Instagram fitness influencers have begun posting anti-trafficking memes to their millions of followers. Great. Even the Trump campaign has begun sharing more anti-trafficking content to its millions of followers. Also great. So I just want to ask Mr. Kevin Roose, how could increased awareness of human trafficking be a bad thing? And as a side note, doesn't he seem just a little sad that fitness enthusiasts and mommy bloggers might not be Democrats? I think that's a lot of what's driving this. He goes on to say some activists such as Tim Ballard and the founder of the anti-trafficking group Operation Underground Railroad and see an opportunity to reach new, hyper-engaged audience online. Some of these theories have allowed people to open their eyes, Mr. Ballard said. So now it's our job to flood the space with real information so the facts can be shared. Others worry that QAnon will divert valuable resources from legitimate groups trying to stop trafficking after the Wayfair incident. The Polaris Project, a nonprofit organization that runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline, issued a news release saying its hotline had been overwhelmed with false reports. Well, you know who else loves to overwhelm people with false reporting? The New York Times. Here, our brave journalist who refers to people critical of QAnon as activists, but would never refer to an actual QAnon as activists, forgets to mention that the Polaris Project is almost 3/4 funded by federal money or by government money. So he's ignoring a big, obvious, rational subject that drives much of QAnon's interest in human trafficking, and that's the crime's connection to the government. Convenient of him to leave that out, isn't it? Any knowledgeable QAnon will tell you that there's another well-known and well-evidenced conspiracy that involves the government's active and factual participation in trafficking of individuals, especially through agencies like Child Protective Services. Ask its victims like Sarah Ruth Ashcraft and Sharika Soul. These are real people who give real testimony to the problems with government funding of all so-called anti-trafficking charities, because the agencies they have to fight against, like Child Protective Services, are in some cases assisting human trafficking to occur. Sarah and Sharika claim to be victims of government-funded illegal human trafficking. So why is the Times ignoring them and attacking QAnons instead? And as he highlights the increase in false reports to the trafficking hotline, the Times also misses the openly reported point that the National Human Trafficking Hotline already underwent a 69% increase in reports just last year. Who was responsible for all those reports? Mr. Roose. And I'm sure none of those reports were false, because QAnon didn't get the Save the Children hashtag trending until just a few weeks ago. Pretty hard to pin all those false reports on QAnon. Kevin Roose concludes towards the end of his article by saying the truth about child sex trafficking, as if he would know it, these experts told me, is much less salacious than QAnon would have you believe. Quote, it's not happening in some secret cabal. It's happening in every single community, said Lori Cohen, the executive director of ECPAT USA, an anti-trafficking organization. But it's easier to focus on public figures than to think about the reality that trafficking is happening in our midst, among people we know, to children we know. And that last part I wouldn't disagree with one bit. But I will say this. Why does everything have to involve celebrities in order for the Times to consider it salacious? It's too bad that his expert's choice of words betrays his own assertion. The expert quoted by the Times here is to be believed, then the use of the phrase every single community has to include the communities of the wealthy and the elite. Doesn't it? Doesn't it? I'm Nigel Kent from Trouble in Paradise, and I'll see you next time.